My name is Desmond, 32 years old, and I save lives for a living. Not the kind my investment banker father approved of. Not the path my perfect younger brother Jackson followed. According to my family, being a firefighter meant I failed at life. For years, I accepted their disappointment, their dismissive glances, their backhanded comments at every holiday dinner. Until that night at my brother's corporate gala, when his CEO looked at me, face pale with recognition, and everything changed. The look on my father's face when he finally realized the truth. Priceless. Before I take you through how it all unfolded, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, this story burns hotter than the blazes I battle every day. I grew up in Brookline, an affluent suburb just outside of Boston. Our house was one of those stately New England colonials with perfect landscaping, 6 bedrooms, and a 3-car garage that housed my father Harold's collection of luxury vehicles. My mother Sophia, a former corporate attorney who left her practice to raise us, made sure our home was always immaculate for the frequent dinner parties and social gatherings that seemed to fill our calendar. From the day I was born, expectations were crystal clear. The Ashford family had a legacy to uphold. My father graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School before climbing the ranks at Goldman Sachs. My mother was top of her class at Yale Law. Their parents before them had similar prestigious careers. Success in our family had one definition: prestigious education, high-paying career, social connections, and material wealth. Jackson, my younger brother by 3 years, seemed to absorb this family doctrine from the womb. By kindergarten, he was already organizing his toys by value and trading snacks at lunch for maximum return. My father would beam with pride when Jackson would use words like investment and assets in elementary school. That boy is going to carry on the Ashford tradition, he'd tell his colleagues, while I'd stand awkwardly nearby, already sensing I was somehow different. It wasn't that I wasn't smart or capable. I got solid grades, was captain of the swim team, and generally stayed out of trouble. But I never felt that pull toward finance or law that seemed to run in our bloodline. My fascination with firefighters began when I was 8 years old. Our family was visiting my grandparents in Maine when a small fire broke out in their kitchen. Nothing major, but enough smoke to trigger the alarms and bring the local fire department. I watched in awe as these brave men and women in their gear methodically handled the situation, calm and reassuring. One firefighter named Tony noticed my wide-eyed stare and let me try on his helmet. "Maybe we'll see you at the firehouse someday, kid," he said with a wink. That night at dinner, I couldn't stop talking about the firefighters and how I wanted to be just like them when I grew up. "That's a nice hobby interest, Desmond," my father said dismissively. "But Ashfords become leaders in business or law. That's where real success happens." My mother patted my hand. "It's just a phase, honey. You'll outgrow it." But I never did. Throughout middle school and high school, while Jackson was founding investment clubs and securing prestigious summer internships, I was volunteering with the local emergency response team and taking every first aid certification I could find. My bedroom walls featured posters of firefighters rather than sports cars or celebrities. During my junior year of high school, I joined a youth program at our local fire station, spending weekends learning basic skills and helping around the firehouse. It was the first place I truly felt I belonged. The camaraderie, the sense of purpose, the knowledge that your work directly saved lives and protected communities. It resonated with something deep inside me. My parents treated my interest like an embarrassing hobby. When their friends would ask about their sons at social gatherings, they'd gush about Jackson's perfect SAT scores and Harvard applications, while mumbling vaguely about me, finding my way, or exploring options. Our family home became increasingly uncomfortable as graduation approached. The pressure to apply to Ivy League schools mounted. My father arranged meetings with his contacts at various financial institutions. My mother left brochures for prestigious universities on my bed. Jackson, now a freshman at Harvard following perfectly in my father's footsteps, would come home on breaks and pontificate about networking and building the right connections for future success. "You don't want to end up like Uncle Robert," my father would caution whenever I seemed resistant to his plans. Uncle Robert was the family cautionary tale, a talented musician who chose art over business and now taught piano lessons in a small apartment. The horror. The breaking point came during my senior year spring break. My father had arranged an internship interview at his firm without even asking me. When I told him I had already committed to an emergency services training camp that week, the vein in his forehead bulged dangerously. "This is your future we're talking about, Desmond. Not some juvenile fantasy about sliding down poles and spraying hoses." That night, alone in my room beneath the weight of expectations I never asked for, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to live someone else's definition of success. I was going to follow my own path, whatever the consequences. The showdown happened on a rainy Sunday afternoon in April, just weeks before high school graduation. My acceptance letter to the Portland Fire Academy had arrived the day before, and I'd made my decision. With shoulders squared and heart pounding, I walked into my father's mahogany-paneled study, where he sat reviewing quarterly reports. "I need to talk to you," I said, clutching the acceptance letter. My father barely looked up. "If it's about college applications, the deadline extensions I arranged expire next week." "I'm not applying to college." The words hung in the air between us. "I've been accepted to the Portland Fire Academy. I'm moving to Oregon after graduation to become a firefighter." The silence that followed was deafening. My father slowly removed his reading glasses, his face transitioning from confusion to disbelief to anger. "This is absurd," he finally said. "You can't throw away your future on some working-class job playing with fire hoses." "It's not playing. It's saving lives," I countered. "And it's not throwing away my future. It's choosing my own." What followed was the kind of argument that changes family dynamics forever. My father's voice rose to a volume I'd rarely heard as he listed all the opportunities I was rejecting, the family legacy I was abandoning, and the embarrassment I was causing. What am I supposed to tell my colleagues? That my son chose to become a civil servant when he could have been managing their retirement accounts? My mother, hearing the commotion, appeared in the doorway. Her reaction was quieter, but no less devastating. "Desmond, honey, maybe you just need some time to think this through," she suggested, her voice tight with worry. "Take a year off, maybe travel a bit. You might find something that interests you just as much, but with more opportunity." By opportunity, she meant money and status, the twin gods of the Ashford household. Jackson, home from his freshman year at Harvard for the weekend, couldn't resist adding his 2 cents. "Way to let down the family name, bro," he said with that smug smile that made me want to punch him. "Though I guess someone has to take the average jobs too, right?" That night I packed a bag and stayed with my friend Tyler. I couldn't bear another night under that roof, suffocating under expectations that were never mine to begin with. When I returned 2 days later, my father delivered his ultimatum over breakfast. "If you go through with this firefighter nonsense, don't expect any financial support. Not for housing, not for expenses, nothing. And don't come crying back when you realize what a mistake you've made." My mother, ever the mediator, tried to soften his stance but ultimately stood with him. "We just want what's best for you," she said, though it was clear they only wanted what they thought was best. 2 weeks after graduation, I packed everything I could fit into my used Honda Civic and drove 3,000 miles to Portland. I had exactly $4,812 in savings, no family support, and a small studio apartment lined up in a less than ideal neighborhood. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. The Portland Fire Academy was nothing like the ivy-covered buildings of Harvard that Jackson sent photos from. It was utilitarian, practical, and intense. The training was grueling, both physically and mentally. We spent hours in full gear in simulated fire conditions, learning to navigate smoke-filled rooms, carry unconscious victims down ladders, and make split-second decisions that could mean life or death. Many nights I collapsed into bed with muscles screaming and lungs burning. Some mornings I woke up wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. There were recruits stronger than me, faster than me, with better technical knowledge. But none wanted it more. None had burned their family bridges so completely that failure wasn't an option. Captain Frank Lawson noticed my determination. A 30-year veteran with a reputation for being the toughest instructor at the academy, he took an interest in pushing me to my limits. "You've got something to prove, Ashford," he'd say during particularly brutal training exercises. "Channel that chip on your shoulder into focus." My phone calls home grew increasingly infrequent and tense. My father would ask if I was ready to be reasonable yet. My mother would sigh deeply and tell me how worried she was about my future. Jackson rarely came to the phone at all. The financial reality of my choice hit hard. While my academy training was covered by a stipend, it was barely enough to cover rent and ramen noodles. I picked up weekend shifts at a local bar just to make ends meet. When my car broke down 3 months in, I couldn't afford to fix it and started taking the bus everywhere. During one particularly low moment, after a training exercise gone wrong and a particularly cutting phone call with my father, I sat on the floor of my tiny apartment and nearly called it quits. I pulled up the Harvard application website and stared at it for an hour. One call, one admission of failure, and I could return to the fold. My father would arrange everything, smooth it all over with his connections. Instead, I deleted the browser tab, made a pot of cheap coffee, and studied fire science material until sunrise. I wasn't going back. Not ever. 6 months later, I graduated from the academy and was assigned to Station 42 in Northeast Portland. My family didn't attend the ceremony. My father sent a text. "Hope you come to your senses soon. The door won't stay open forever." I didn't respond. I was too busy putting on my uniform for my first official shift as a Portland firefighter. 3 years into my firefighting career, Portland had become home in ways Boston never was. Station 42 wasn't just my workplace, it was my family. The kind of family that supports your choices rather than dictating them. Thomas Reyes, our lieutenant, had 20 years of experience and the scars to prove it. He became the mentor I needed, teaching me the nuances of the job that no academy could cover. Diego Hernandez, a second-generation firefighter with an encyclopedic knowledge of building structures, always had my back during the toughest calls. Kyle Winters, just a year my senior on the force, became my closest friend and occasional roommate when my building's heat went out during winter months. We worked 48-hour shifts together, cooking meals in the station kitchen, maintaining equipment, training, and responding to everything from major structural fires to medical emergencies to the occasional cat in a tree. Between calls, we shared stories, played brutal practical jokes on each other, and formed the kind of bonds that only come from regularly placing your life in someone else's hands. Blood makes you related, Thomas would say after particularly difficult rescues. Fire makes you family. My actual blood relatives remained distant figures in my life. My father had followed through on his financial cutoff, though my mother occasionally sent small care packages with homemade cookies and carefully worded notes that never mentioned my career choice. Holiday phone calls were exercises in awkward small talk, with my father inevitably steering conversation toward Jackson's rising star at the finance firm, where he now worked under my father's mentorship. Junior VP at 25, my father announced during our brief Christmas call in my third year. Youngest in company history. I wanted to say I'd helped save 3 children from a burning building the week before, but knew it wouldn't register as an achievement in his ledger of success. Through disciplined saving and the occasional overtime shift, I'd managed to move from my initial tiny studio to a modest 1-bedroom apartment closer to the station. It wasn't much by Ashford standards, no granite countertops or doorman, but it was mine, earned through work I was proud of. My dating life had its complications. Many women were initially attracted to the firefighter uniform and the heroic connotations, but some lost interest when they discovered the realities. Modest salary, dangerous conditions, and irregular hours. Amanda, a pharmaceutical sales rep I dated for 6 months, eventually ended things after meeting my colleagues' wives at a department barbecue. "I just thought you'd be more ambitious," she said during our breakup conversation. "These guys seem content to stay firefighters forever." "That's because it's a calling, not a stepping stone," I replied, realizing we were fundamentally incompatible. Despite these personal challenges, I was advancing in my career through dedicated service. I'd earned specialized certifications in hazardous materials and technical rescue. My performance reviews consistently ranked in the top percentile. When a senior position opened up, Thomas recommended me without hesitation. "Ashford thinks 3 steps ahead in crisis situations," he told the chief. Natural leader material. My promotion came with a small raise and additional responsibilities that I embraced enthusiastically. For the first time, I had younger firefighters looking to me for guidance, and I channeled everything I'd learned from Thomas, Diego, and others into being the kind of mentor they deserved. Family gatherings became increasingly rare, but I couldn't avoid my cousin Stephanie's wedding in Boston during my 4th year. The 6-hour flight gave me plenty of time to prepare for the inevitable family interrogation. The reception was exactly as I'd feared. Relatives I barely remembered asking pointed questions about my interesting career choice, with thinly veiled judgment. My father introducing me to his colleagues as my son who decided to take an alternate path, rather than simply my son the firefighter. Jackson, now sporting expensive suits and a perpetual look of superiority, making sure everyone knew about his recent promotion and Manhattan apartment. "Still enjoying playing with fire trucks?" he asked during the cocktail hour, swirling 25-year-old scotch in a crystal tumbler. "Still enjoying playing with other people's money," I countered, immediately regretting the petty response. My mother, sensing tension, pulled me aside later that evening. For a brief moment, I thought she might express some genuine interest in my life. "Your father would never admit it," she said in a hushed tone, "but he does have a colleague whose beach house was saved by firefighters last summer. He mentioned you then." It was the closest thing to approval I'd received in years, and yet still framed through the lens of my father's world. Not the lives I'd helped save or the communities I'd served, but property preservation that a wealthy man might appreciate. 2 days later, I returned to Portland with renewed appreciation for the life I'd built there. A life measured not in acquisitions or titles, but in direct human impact. Each shift brought opportunities to make a tangible difference in someone's worst day. No spreadsheet or investment portfolio could provide that kind of fulfillment. I threw myself into my work with renewed purpose, taking additional training courses and volunteering for community fire safety programs. If my biological family couldn't recognize the value in my choices, I'd simply keep demonstrating that value through action. Little did I know that one such action would soon change everything. It began as a typical September evening shift. Diego, Kyle and I were playing cards in the station break room, while Thomas updated incident reports at the desk nearby. The scanner chatter provided familiar background noise until the alarm blared, sending us into automatic motion. Structure fire, Riverside Apartment Complex, 1420 Hawthorne Boulevard. Multiple calls reporting flames visible from third floor. Possible entrapment. We were in our gear and on the engine within 58 seconds, a personal best for our team. As we raced through evening traffic with sirens wailing, Thomas briefed us on the building specifics. 6-story complex, approximately 120 units, built in the early 90s with questionable fire safety updates. The glow was visible from 3 blocks away, orange flames licking out of several third-floor windows. 2 other engine companies had arrived just before us, and Battalion Chief Wilkins was establishing command. Ashford, take Hernandez and Winters to conduct primary search on the 4th floor, Thomas ordered as we approached. Reports of multiple residents unaccounted for, and the fire is spreading upward. The lobby was filled with evacuating residents and billowing smoke. We connected to the building's standpipe system and proceeded up the stairwell, passing frightened residents making their way down. The 3rd floor door revealed an inferno in the hallway, flames having already breached several apartments and compromising the corridor. The 4th floor wasn't actively burning yet, but thick black smoke reduced visibility to near zero. The 3 of us moved methodically, maintaining physical or voice contact while searching each unit. Fire department. Call out if you can hear us, I shouted, listening for any response through the roar of the fire below. The first 4 apartments were clear, residents having evacuated. In the 5th, Kyle located an elderly man who had fallen trying to reach the door. We quickly got him on oxygen and directed him toward the stairwell where other firefighters would assist him out. As we continued down the smoke-filled corridor, I heard it. The faint sound of a child crying behind a door at the end of the hall. I've got something in 412, I radioed to the team. Sounds like at least one child. The door was locked, and the crying had intensified to terrified screams. Without hesitation, I used the Halligan tool to force entry. Inside, the smoke was slightly less dense, but I could feel the heat intensifying as the fire spread upward from the apartments below. Following the sounds through the 2-bedroom unit, I found them in a bathtub. A woman clutching 2 small children, maybe 4 and 6 years old, with wet towels over their faces in a desperate attempt to filter the smoke. I'm Desmond with Portland Fire and Rescue, I said calmly, kneeling beside the tub. I'm going to get you out of here. The woman looked up with panic-stricken eyes. Please save my girls first, she begged. We're all getting out together, I assured her, helping them from the tub. I radioed our position to Kyle and Diego, who were completing their section of the search. I've got 3 civilians in 412, a woman and 2 children. Meeting you at the stairwell. As I guided the family toward the door, a thunderous crash shook the building. The floor beneath us trembled ominously. Over the radio, Battalion Chief Wilkins' voice crackled with urgency. All units be advised. Structural compromise on the 3rd floor. Fire has breached into the walls. Evacuate immediately. I repeat, evacuate immediately. I looked at the terrified family, knowing we had moments, not minutes. Change of plans. We're going to move very quickly now. I picked up both children, one under each arm, and instructed the mother to hold onto my air tank straps from behind. The hallway had deteriorated significantly in the few minutes we'd been in the apartment. The smoke was now accompanied by falling debris as the ceiling began to give way. We'd made it halfway to the stairwell when a section of flooring collapsed just yards ahead of us, creating a fiery chasm between us and our exit route. The mother screamed as flames shot up through the new opening. "Mayday, mayday," I radioed, using the emergency call that every firefighter dreads making. Ashford in 4th floor corridor with 3 civilians. Primary escape route compromised. Proceeding to alternate exit. I guided the family back the way we'd come, toward a window at the end of the hall that I'd noted during our initial search. The building's fire escape had been marked as unreliable in our pre-planning documents, but it was now our only option. The window was stuck from years of paint, requiring me to set down the children and break the glass with my tool. After clearing the sharp edges, I helped the mother out first, then passed the terrified children to her one by one. Just as I was about to follow them onto the fire escape, a secondary collapse sent shockwaves through the building. The floor beneath my feet gave way, and suddenly I was falling through a fiery void. I crashed through burning debris, landing hard on what remained of the 3rd floor. Pain shot through my left leg, and sighed as I struggled to orient myself through the smoke and flames. My radio had been damaged in the fall, allowing me to hear the frantic calls from my team but not respond. Ashford report. Desmond, do you copy? Dragging myself through the burning rubble, I spotted a window about 15 feet away. With my oxygen supply dwindling and the structural integrity of the entire floor questionable, I knew it was my only chance. Each movement sent waves of pain through my injured leg, but the alternative was unthinkable. Just as I reached the window, hands grabbed me from outside. Diego and Kyle had spotted me from their position on an adjacent ladder truck and maneuvered to my location. "Thought you could use an elevator service," Diego quipped as they helped me through the window and onto the ladder platform. By the time we reached the ground, the mother and children I'd rescued were being treated by paramedics. Despite my protests, I was loaded into an ambulance alongside them. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain from my injuries could no longer be ignored. At the hospital, I learned I'd suffered a fractured fibula, 3 broken ribs, and smoke inhalation requiring overnight oxygen therapy. The woman I'd rescued, Sarah Powell, had minor smoke inhalation but would recover fully. Her daughters, Emma and Lily, were unharmed thanks to their mother's quick thinking with the wet towels. Local news cameras captured footage of the rescue, including the dramatic moment when Diego and Kyle pulled me from the window. By morning, the story had spread to national outlets, with headlines calling it the bathtub miracle rescue, after Sarah told reporters about how she'd kept her children in the tub while waiting for help. The fire department held a press conference where Chief Wilkins praised the efforts of all responding teams. Sarah Powell tearfully thanked me for saving her family, the girls clinging to her legs as cameras flashed around us. For 3 days, my hospital room filled with visitors. Fellow firefighters, department officials, even the mayor came by with a commendation for bravery. Local children dropped off hand-drawn cards thanking Mr. Firefighter Hero. Despite the national coverage, my phone remained conspicuously silent of calls from Boston. No congratulations from my father. No concerned check-in from my mother. Not even a text from Jackson. The only acknowledgement came in the form of a generic flower arrangement from the Ashford family that I suspected my mother had ordered from a standard hospital gift service. As I was discharged with crutches and instructions for follow-up care, Diego helped me to his car. "Your family see the news?" he asked carefully, knowing it was a sensitive subject. "Apparently not," I replied, trying to hide the lingering hurt beneath nonchalance. "Their loss," Diego said simply, and in those two words was all the validation I needed. 6 months after the Riverside fire, my physical recovery was complete. My leg had healed, though it occasionally ached before rainstorms, which my colleagues joked made me a better meteorologist than the local weather team. I'd returned to active duty after 8 weeks of physical therapy and desk assignment, welcomed back by the station with an embarrassingly heartfelt celebration. Life had largely returned to normal when the call came from my mother on a quiet Sunday afternoon. "Desmond, darling, how are you?" Her voice carried the same carefully modulated warmth it always did, as if testing the emotional waters before diving in. "I'm good, Mom. Just finished a 48-hour shift." "Oh, that sounds exhausting," she said, the slight note of disapproval impossible to miss. "Listen, I'm calling about Jackson's company event next month. They're having some sort of gala to celebrate their expansion, and Jackson specifically asked if you could attend." I nearly dropped the phone in shock. Jackson had barely spoken 3 sentences to me in the past 5 years, and suddenly he wanted me at his corporate celebration. "Why would he want me there?" I asked bluntly. My mother sighed. "Because we're family, Desmond. And it would mean a lot to your father and me if we could all be together for this important occasion in Jackson's life." What she meant, I suspected, was that it would look better to have the complete family unit present for their golden child's moment of glory. But 6 months of silence after my rescue made me less inclined toward charity. "I'll think about it," I said noncommittally. "Please do. Your father has already arranged a plane ticket. First class," she added, as if the prospect of free luxury travel would be the deciding factor. After we hung up, I stared at my apartment ceiling, weighing the pros and cons. On one hand, returning to Boston meant subjecting myself to the same disapproval and dismissal I'd fled years ago. On the other, a tiny part of me still longed for some recognition from the family that had raised me, however flawed our relationship had become. After discussing it with Thomas during our next shift, I called my mother back and reluctantly agreed to attend. "But I'm staying in a hotel," I insisted, wanting some neutral territory. "Don't be silly," she countered. "Your room is exactly as you left it." Which was precisely what I was afraid of. 3 weeks later, I found myself on a plane to Boston, watching the familiar landscape of my childhood materialize beneath the clouds. My stomach tightened with each mile closer to home, years of confidence and self-assurance suddenly feeling fragile in the face of returning to where I'd always been measured and found wanting. My mother met me at the airport, her carefully maintained appearance exactly as I remembered. Perfectly styled hair, tasteful jewelry, and the practiced smile that revealed nothing of her true thoughts. "You look well," she said after our awkward embrace, her eyes quickly assessing me. "Though a bit thin. Are you eating properly?" And just like that, I was a child again, my adult life and accomplishments reduced to whether I was consuming sufficient vegetables. The drive to Brookline was filled with my mother's careful monologue about neighborhood developments, distant relatives' life events, and Jackson's latest achievements. I nodded and offered minimal responses, watching the familiar streets pass by and feeling like a tourist in my own past. The house was exactly as I remembered. Imposing, immaculate, and cold despite its expensive heating system. My father was in his study when we arrived, and I braced myself for our first interaction in nearly 2 years. Harold Ashford had aged since I'd seen him last. His hair had more gray, and new lines framed his mouth, but his posture remained ramrod straight as he rose to greet me with a firm handshake rather than an embrace. "Desmond, good flight?" he asked, the question perfunctory. "Fine, thanks." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us until my mother swooped in with suggestions about refreshments and getting settled. I escaped to my old bedroom, which was indeed preserved like a museum exhibit of my former life. High school swimming trophies still lined the bookshelf, and even my old Harvard application materials remained in a folder on the desk, a silent rebuke to the path not taken. Dinner that evening was an exercise in careful conversation, with my parents asking surface-level questions about Portland while studiously avoiding any mention of my actual career. Jackson, who arrived late with dramatic apologies about closing an important deal, immediately became the center of attention. "Alexander was incredibly impressed with how you handled the Singapore clients," my father said, pride evident in every syllable. "He mentioned board potential in the next 5 years. Jackson preened at the praise. "Well, Powell knows talent when he sees it. Speaking of which, wait until you meet him tomorrow night, Dad. The man's a genius. Completely revolutionized how the firm approaches emerging markets." The conversation continued in this vein for nearly an hour. Jackson's achievements, his brilliant boss Alexander Powell, the company's remarkable growth under their leadership. My contributions were limited to passing side dishes and nodding at appropriate intervals. When Jackson finally acknowledged my presence directly, it was with the same condescending tone he'd perfected in childhood. "So, Desmond, still enjoying your little job? Playing with hoses and rescuing cats from trees?" Before I could respond, my father interjected. "Desmond has chosen his path. Let's leave it at that." The dismissal stung worse than Jackson's taunt. 6 years in one of the most dangerous professions, lives saved, commendations earned, and my father couldn't even acknowledge the basic value of my work. Later that night, as I lay in my childhood bed staring at the ceiling, I seriously considered booking an early flight back to Portland. What was I doing here, subjecting myself to this familiar pain? But something kept me there, some stubborn need to see this through, to face my family on their territory one more time. The next day passed in tense politeness, as preparations for the gala consumed the household. My mother fretted about my wardrobe, eventually insisting I borrow one of my father's suits since mine was deemed insufficient for the occasion. "It's the Harvard Club, Desmond," she explained, as if I'd suggested wearing firefighting gear to dinner. "Appearances matter." By evening, I was stuffed into one of my father's older suits, slightly too large in the shoulders and too short in the legs, feeling like an imposter in more ways than one. As we drove to the venue in my father's Mercedes, Jackson dominated the conversation with predictions about the evening's networking opportunities and the importance of making the right impression on key executives. I gazed out the window at Boston's glittering skyline, feeling further from home than I ever had in Portland. The Harvard Club of Boston embodied old money prestige in every detail, from the dark wood paneling to the oil portraits of distinguished alumni lining the walls. Smartly dressed waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres among clusters of guests in formal attire, their conversations a gentle murmur of business jargon and polite laughter. I followed my family through the grand ballroom, feeling increasingly out of place with each step. Jackson moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and making introductions, while our father beamed proudly beside him. My mother drifted toward a group of women she knew from various charity boards, leaving me to fend for myself at the periphery of the Ashford family orbit. "And this is my brother," Jackson would say when social obligation required acknowledging my existence, never mentioning my profession or accomplishments. "Just my brother," as if I were merely an extension of his identity rather than a person with my own. During one such introduction to a silver-haired executive and his wife, the inevitable question arose. "And what do you do, young man?" the woman asked pleasantly. Before I could answer, my father smoothly interjected. "Desmond's exploring opportunities in civil service out west." "More champagne, Barbara." The dismissal was so practiced, so casual in its completeness, that I almost admired its efficiency. In one sentence, my father had managed to make my career sound like a temporary hobby while redirecting the conversation. For the next hour, I endured similar interactions, becoming increasingly isolated even in the crowded room. I found momentary refuge near a less populated corner, watching my family work the room with the social precision they'd perfected over generations. The formal program began with speeches from company executives, followed by a multimedia presentation on the firm's remarkable growth under its visionary leadership. Jackson featured prominently in the video segments, his carefully cultivated image of ambitious brilliance projected literally larger than life on the ballroom screens. When Jackson himself took the stage to discuss the company's Asia-Pacific strategy, my parents practically vibrated with pride. His presentation was polished and confident, exactly what was expected of an Ashford. Enthusiastic applause followed his conclusion, with my father leading the standing ovation. As dinner was served, I found myself seated at the family table alongside my parents, Jackson, and several high-ranking company executives I'd been briefly introduced to. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone, business terminology, and inside jokes creating a current I had no part in. It was during the dessert course that everything changed. A distinguished man in his 50s approached our table, his presence causing a ripple of attention throughout the room. Jackson immediately stood, hand extended in greeting. "Alexander, I'm so glad you could join us," he gushed. "Let me introduce you to my family." So this was the famous Alexander Powell, CEO and Jackson's personal hero. He had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority, but his eyes showed a warmth that surprised me. "Harold Ashford, sir. We met at the Tokyo conference last year," my father said, shaking Powell's hand with barely contained excitement. "Of course, Harold. Jackson speaks highly of your guidance in his career. And this must be Mrs. Ashford," Powell continued, turning to my mother with a charming smile. When he finally turned to me, I expected the same brief, dismissive interaction I'd experienced all evening. Instead, he paused, his expression shifting from polite interest to confusion to shock in the span of seconds. "I'm sorry, but have we met before?" he asked, studying my face intently. "You look incredibly familiar." Jackson laughed nervously. "This is just my brother, Alexander. He's visiting from Portland." Powell's eyes widened. "Portland, Oregon." I nodded, increasingly confused by his intense focus. Are you by any chance a firefighter?" he asked, his voice hushed with what sounded strangely like reverence. The table fell silent. My father's fork froze midway to his mouth. My mother's practiced smile faltered. "Yes, sir. 6 years with Portland Fire and Rescue," I replied. Powell's face transformed completely, emotion overtaking his composed executive demeanor. "Wait, you're Desmond Ashford, the firefighter from the Riverside Apartments fire last September." The silence at our table had now spread to neighboring ones, as people turned to watch the unexpected scene unfolding. "Yes, that was me," I confirmed, still confused by the intensity of his reaction. What happened next remains one of the most surreal moments of my life. Alexander Powell, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar investment firm, practically collapsed into the chair beside me, his hand gripping my shoulder with surprising strength. "My God, you're the one who saved my sister and her daughters," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah Powell and my nieces, Emma and Lily. From the fourth-floor bathtub." The room seemed to tilt around me as the connection crystallized. Sarah Powell, the woman and children I'd guided through fire and smoke. The rescue that had made national news. "Sarah is your sister?" I managed to ask. Powell nodded, tears now visible in his eyes. She and the girls were visiting Portland, staying in that apartment complex while looking at potential relocation options. When I got the call that there was a fire, his voice broke momentarily. But then she told me about the firefighter who found them, who carried both girls through impossible conditions, who stayed with them even after the floor collapsed. My father's face had drained of all color. My mother's hand covered her mouth in shock. Jackson looked like he'd been slapped. "You're that firefighter? The one from the national news?" my father asked, his voice barely audible. Before I could respond, Powell had risen to his feet, still gripping my shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his authoritative voice instantly commanding the attention of the entire ballroom. "I need to interrupt our proceedings for a moment. We have an unrecognized hero among us tonight." The crowd quieted, all eyes turning to our table. "Many of you know that my sister and her 2 young daughters were caught in a tragic apartment fire in Portland last year. What you may not know is that the firefighter who risked his life to save them, who suffered serious injuries ensuring their safety, is here with us tonight." Powell's hand moved to my back, urging me to stand. In a daze, I complied. "This is Desmond Ashford, who Jackson never mentioned is his brother. Desmond carried my nieces through flames and smoke when the building was literally collapsing around them. The doctors said that without his actions, my sister and her children would not have survived." A murmur ran through the crowd, and I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon me. "In my world," Powell continued, "we measure success in portfolios and profit margins. But tonight, I'm reminded that true value lies in the courage to run into danger when others flee, to put strangers' lives above your own. There is no higher yield than the lives this man has saved." The room erupted in applause, startling in its suddenness and intensity. People I'd never met approached the table, wanting to shake my hand or express their admiration. Corporate executives with 7-figure salaries were looking at me with genuine respect, something I'd never seen in my father's eyes. Through it all, I watched my family's reactions. My mother was crying openly now, whether from pride or shame I couldn't tell. Jackson's expression cycled rapidly between disbelief and a complex jealousy he couldn't quite disguise. But it was my father's face that struck me most deeply. Harold Ashford, who had spent decades measuring worth in dollars and prestigious connections, looked utterly lost, as if the carefully constructed framework of his values had suddenly revealed fatal structural flaws. As the commotion continued around us, Powell leaned close to speak privately. "My family owes you a debt we can never repay," he said simply. "Sarah asked me to find you, to thank you properly, but I had no idea you were connected to Jackson. He never mentioned having a firefighter brother, let alone a hero." I didn't know how to respond, the years of dismissal and disappointment from my family colliding with this unexpected validation from a stranger. "Would you be willing to say a few words?" Powell asked, gesturing toward the podium. "I think everyone here would value hearing your perspective more than another financial presentation." In that moment, looking at my speechless family and the attentive crowd, I realized I had something worth saying after all. Standing at the podium overlooking a sea of expectant faces in designer formal wear, I felt strangely calm. These were the exact people my father had always wanted me to impress, the social and financial elite he'd measured success against. Yet as Alexander Powell introduced me with genuine reverence in his voice, their approval seemed suddenly irrelevant compared to the 6 years of purpose I'd found in Portland. "I'm not much for public speaking," I began honestly. "In my job, we communicate in short, direct terms because sometimes there's not much air to waste on extra words." A gentle ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, breaking the tension. "I never set out to be a hero. That word gets thrown around too easily. I'm just someone who found work that matters deeply to me." When I entered that apartment at Riverside, I wasn't thinking about recognition or reward. I was thinking about the people inside who needed help. From the corner of my eye, I could see my father watching intently, his expression unreadable. In firefighting, we have a saying: we might be the only ones running into a building when everyone else is running out. That responsibility is both a burden and a privilege. It means being present for people on their worst days, when everything they value is threatened. Powell nodded encouragingly from the front row. Meeting Sarah and her daughters was just part of my job that day. I had no idea they were connected to anyone in this room. And that's an important point, I think. The value of a person doesn't change based on their connections or status. Every life we respond to matters equally. I paused, gathering my thoughts. For those who measure success in portfolio growth or corner offices, what we do might seem simple. But standing in a burning hallway, making decisions that determine whether a family lives or dies, there's nothing simple about it. It requires technical knowledge, physical endurance, and a kind of courage that can't be taught in any classroom. The room was completely silent now, hundreds of financial professionals hanging on the words of someone they would have overlooked at any other event. I don't share this to dismiss the work you all do. Every profession has its purpose. But I've found mine in service, in being the help that arrives when someone dials 3 numbers in desperation. And despite what some might think, that's not failure. That's finding your true calling. My eyes met my father's across the room, and for once I didn't look away. "Thank you for this unexpected recognition. But the real thanks belongs to all first responders who do this work daily, without ceremonies or applause. They're the true heroes, and they don't do it for recognition. They do it because when everything is falling apart, someone needs to hold the world together." The applause that followed was deafening, genuine in a way that the earlier corporate accolades had not been. People rose to their feet, including my mother, who was openly weeping now. Even Jackson stood, though his expression remained complicated. As I returned to our table, Alexander Powell intercepted me, pulling me into an unexpected embrace. "Sarah is flying in tomorrow specifically to see you," he said. "But in the meantime, I have a proposition. My foundation has been looking for new initiatives to support, and first responder equipment and training seems overdue for investment. Would you be willing to consult with us on where funds could make the most difference?" Before I could respond, my father appeared at my elbow, his face flushed with emotion I'd rarely seen him display. "Desmond, could we speak privately for a moment?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. In a small antechamber off the main ballroom, my father paced briefly before turning to face me directly. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "A significant one." I remained silent, unwilling to make this easier for him. "For years, I measured your choices against a very narrow definition of success," he continued. "One based on institutions and income, rather than character and impact. Seeing you through Alexander Powell's eyes tonight has shifted my perspective considerably. It took a wealthy CEO's approval for you to see value in what I do. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. My father winced. I deserve that. But it wasn't his approval that affected me. It was seeing the actual impact of your work embodied in his emotion. The realization that my son saved lives that mattered deeply to someone else. That while I've been generating wealth, you've been generating something far more valuable. He struggled visibly with his next words. I was wrong, Desmond. Wrong to dismiss your calling, wrong to withdraw support, wrong to make you feel less valuable than your brother. Pride prevented me from acknowledging the courage and conviction your choice required. The apology was imperfect, still framed partly through the lens of external validation, but it was more than I'd ever expected to hear from Harold Ashford. Before I could respond, the door opened and my mother entered, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with tears. All this time, she said, her voice breaking, all these years. You were a hero, and we treated you like you'd failed. I didn't do it to be a hero, Mom, I replied gently. I did it because it was right for me. I knew, she confessed suddenly. I saw the news coverage of the fire. I recognized you immediately, but your father was so set in his position, and I was a coward. I should have stood up for you. The admission stunned me. You knew about the rescue, and you never said anything. She nodded miserably. I've been following your career through news searches. I have a folder of articles. The 3-alarm warehouse fire last year. The highway pileup rescue. I saw them all, but I never had the courage to acknowledge them to you or challenge your father's narrative. My father looked equally shocked by this revelation. The carefully maintained, united front of my parents suddenly revealed its fractures. Our family reconciliation was interrupted by Jackson's arrival, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. They're asking for you back in there, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Powell wants to announce some kind of foundation partnership with you. As I moved to return to the ballroom, Jackson stopped me with a hand on my arm. I didn't know, he said quietly. About the fire, about Powell's sister. I never made the connection. Would it have mattered if you had? I asked. He had no answer for that, and perhaps that was answer enough. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Corporate executives who had barely nodded at me earlier now wanted to hear about my experiences. Powell introduced me to board members and major investors, outlining his plans for a first responder support initiative with my guidance. Throughout it all, I watched my family watching me, their worldview visibly realigning in real time. The next morning, Sarah Powell and her daughters arrived at my parents' home, creating another emotional scene as she embraced me and reintroduced her daughters, now a year older but still recognizable as the children I'd carried through smoke and flame. I've wanted to thank you properly since that day, she said, while Emma and Lily shyly presented hand-drawn pictures of firefighters. When Alex told me he'd found you by complete coincidence at Jackson's work event, I couldn't believe it. My father watched this interaction with an expression I'd never seen before, something like humility mixing with belated pride. That afternoon, Powell presented his foundation's proposal. $1 million initial investment in equipment and training for fire departments nationwide, with me serving as program advisor. The position would allow me to continue active duty in Portland, while helping direct resources to departments in need. As I prepared to return to Portland 2 days later, the family dynamics had shifted dramatically. My father awkwardly asked detailed questions about my work, genuinely listening to the answers. My mother showed me her secret folder of news clippings, years of my career documented from afar. Even Jackson made halting efforts to engage without condescension. The foundation position is impressive, he offered as we waited for my airport car. Powell doesn't trust many people with philanthropic direction. It's not about prestige, Jackson, I replied. It's about getting necessary resources to people who need them to save lives. He nodded slowly. I'm starting to understand that there are different ways to measure impact. 6 months later, my life in Portland continues with new dimensions. The Powell Foundation work has allowed me to advocate for first responders nationwide while maintaining my position at Station 42. My apartment remains modest, my schedule demanding, but my sense of purpose has only deepened. My family relationships have evolved too. My father calls weekly with questions about my work that show genuine interest rather than judgment. My mother visited Portland last month, touring the station and meeting my firefighting family with tears in her eyes. Even Jackson has shown signs of reevaluating his own measures of success, recently volunteering with a financial literacy program for underprivileged youth. The greatest change, though, is internal. For years, I carried the weight of perceived failure, the nagging doubt planted by family disapproval. That weight is gone now, replaced by the certainty that following your true calling, whatever others might think of it, is the only path to authentic fulfillment. Success isn't measured in dollars, degrees, or titles. It's measured in lives touched, in service rendered, in courage shown when it matters most. Sometimes it takes a dramatic revelation for others to see that truth, but you don't need external validation to know your own worth. As I prepare for another shift at Station 42, I think about the many paths my life could have taken. The prestigious education, the corner office, the material wealth that might have been mine had I followed my father's plan. And I know with absolute certainty that I would choose this path again every time. Because true success isn't about what you acquire. It's about who you become in service to others. I wonder if you've ever had to choose between expectations and your authentic path. Have you stood your ground when others thought you were making a mistake? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need encouragement to follow their own calling, even when it goes against what others expect. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most meaningful successes often look like failures to those measuring with the wrong yardstick.